There is a strange stillness that descends after the storm of healing. You wake up, and the world looks the same. Sunlight spills through the curtains. The coffee still steams in your cup, and yet something within you feels unrecognizably different. The colors feel muted. The ambitions that once pulled you out of bed now seem weightless, distant, and irrelevant. You sit by the window not in sadness exactly, but in a kind of unfamiliar silence, as if a part of you has left the room and forgotten to return. This is not a crisis. This is not a defeat. This is the quiet aftermath of confronting your shadow. You went into the underworld. You faced what was hidden. You stopped running from the fear, the ache, the loneliness you had once disguised as strength. And now that you are no longer pretending, the inner scaffolding you once leaned on has collapsed. But Carl Jung warned us, this collapse is not destruction, it is initiation. For years, perhaps decades, your drive came from places you could not see. The longing to be enough, the pressure to prove yourself. The unspoken belief is that if you just keep moving, achieving and pleasing, the pain will not catch up to you. And then one day it did. You slowed down. You turned inward. You began to ask the questions that unraveled the old self. And in that unraveling, the engine that once kept you going fell silent. You are not broken. You are simply no longer fueled by unconscious pain. The goals that once defined you now feel foreign because they were never really yours. They were echoes of unmet needs, reflections of a self you built to survive. This phase, the one you are in now, is not the end. It is the sacred pause between chapters. It is the space where the old scripts lose meaning and the new story has not yet revealed itself. Jung called this space in antiodromia, the turning of tides, where the psyche, having gone to one extreme, begins its journey to the other. But in this in-between, you may feel like you're floating without a center, a compass, or even a desire to move. And that is the point. The old self has done its work. The persona you wore has served its purpose. And now, without those costumes, you are learning how to simply be, without chasing, without striving, without performing. This is not depression. It is disorientation. It is the soul's way of clearing space for something more honest, more lasting, more true. The motivation you once had is gone. Not because you've lost yourself, but because you are finally meeting the self that never needed to be driven by fear. And that self is not loud. It does not shout. It waits, it listens, it breathes. And it knows that what comes next will not be born from survival, but from wholeness. Let this silence be the sign you've been waiting for. Not the end of your journey, but the return to where it always truly begins. There is a moment, often unspoken, when healing becomes more disorienting than the pain ever was. When the inner storm finally subsides and the walls you spent your life building have crumbled, you may find yourself standing in a vast echoing quiet. This silence is not peace as you imagined it. It is a kind of spiritual vertigo, a confrontation with the question no one warned you would come. Who am I now that I am no longer surviving? Sarah, though that's not her real name, wrestled with this exact silence. For 2 years, she journeyed deep into herself, bravely revisiting childhood wounds, reparenting the parts she once disowned, and gently facing the patterns that had entangled her for decades, the therapy sessions, the late-night tears, the moments of awakening where shame loosened its grip and fear softened into tenderness. It all mattered. And it worked. The anxiety that once lit a fire beneath her decisions disappeared. The constant urge to prove her worth dissolved. Loneliness, once a looming threat, was now replaced by an inner steadiness. But when she returned to her polished, fast-paced career in marketing, something had changed. The excitement that once buzzed in her veins felt like a language she no longer spoke. She sat in meetings and smiled through presentations, but inside there was no spark, only a kind of spacious hollowness, as though the soul that once played along had stepped away. I used to wake up with this fire in my belly, she whispered once, eyes searching the floor. Even if it came from fear, it was fuel. Now I wake up and wait for something to move me, but nothing does. What Sarah was experiencing was not failure. It was a sacred passage Carl Jung called nigredo, the blackening. In the language of alchemy, it is the stage where all former forms dissolve, where identity disintegrates, and where life itself seems to fall into an interior eclipse. The self you once knew, the one driven by wounds and reflexes, can no longer carry you forward. But our culture has made no room for this darkness. We are conditioned to believe that healing should feel like light, that growth should look like progress, that every step should be upward. We are taught that if you no longer feel driven, something must be wrong. But what if that stillness is not a malfunction? What if it is the turning point? The moment the false self dies and something ancient and real begins to breathe beneath the surface. This is the paradox. Healing empties you before it fills you. It strips away the fire that burned too fast, too hot, and prepares you for a slower, more luminous kind of light. And though you cannot see it yet, this darkness is not the end. It is the fertile ground from which the soul, now unburdened, will rise. You don't feel like yourself anymore. That's the threshold of your true self. This in-between space can feel like exile. You wake up and feel like a guest in your own life. The dreams you once chased no longer call your name. Yet nothing new has arrived to replace them. It's not sadness in the traditional sense. You are still functional, still breathing, still present, but everything that used to ignite you now feels muted, like someone turned down the volume on your life. Goals that once lit up your vision board feel oddly disconnected, like memories of someone you used to be. Conversations that once sparked curiosity now echo with a quiet hollowness. This is not a failure of spirit. It is not laziness or giving up. What you are experiencing is the quiet revolution of the soul, the dismantling of old motivations that were once disguised as passion, but were rooted in fear, validation, or the longing to be seen. Carl Jung understood this internal stillness as sacred, not pathological. When the ego no longer leads and the deeper self has yet to fully rise, you are pulled into a space that ancient traditions called the threshold. In alchemical terms, this is still nigredo, but now it is thick with silence, not darkness. Imagine a house being renovated from the inside out. From the street, it looks unchanged, perhaps even pristine, but inside the walls are bare. The furniture has been removed, and the rooms echo with absence. You stand in the middle of it, holding tools you don't yet know how to use, surrounded by silence that demands trust. That's what this moment is. The inner architecture is being rebuilt. And because your former drivers no longer function, because fear no longer motivates and approval no longer satisfies, you feel unmoored, floating without a map. But what if that map was never yours to begin with? What if your old motivations were the survival instincts of a child who had to perform, achieve, or protect in order to be loved? The truth is, your psyche is not lost. It is resisting the temptation to reattach to what once kept you busy but disconnected. It is asking you to linger in this quiet, long enough for something deeper to form. In traditional societies, this phase was sacred. It was marked with ceremony, fasting, solitude, a symbolic dying before the new self could emerge. But in modern culture, stillness is misunderstood. Pauses are feared. We are taught to rush toward clarity, to treat ambiguity as a crisis, rather than a crucible. Yet Jung cautioned us, if we skip this step, if we rebuild too soon, we carry our wounds into the future in prettier disguises. The work is not to escape the void, but to inhabit it long enough for a new voice to rise.